things to people before, or like without having to make a comment for it.
This is very cool.
Okay, but it didn't work.
I gotta spend 5 minutes at the beginning making sure everybody's name links to their profile.
Doesn't work for me either. What the heck? Messed up.
Make sure you're logged in. This is a world editable doc. All right, let's jump in. Do we have any new faces? See maybe a couple people. Want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm an engineer on the build service KPAC team.
At VMware.
Yeah, at VMware.
Hello, Mark, also a engineer on the VMware KPAC build service team.
All right, welcome to the working group meeting. I think everybody else has been here before, so we'll move on to release planning and updates. Start with implementation.
I can speak to that. We've been working on implementing the 06 APIs. I think we just decided to push one of the features that was in 06 to 07. But that will position us well to ship the rest of the stuff soon.
Awesome. And any updates on the platform side?
Yeah, there's a release candidate that's cut. There were some pipeline issues, so got cut on Monday and planning on cutting the final release next Monday.
Exciting. All right. And next thing on the agenda is outstanding RFCs. I will share my screen. And we can run through these. First one is allow for different build runtime user IDs. I don't see Sam here. Is there anybody who wants to kind of speak to this a little bit? It is not on the agenda right now.
We talked about this at the previous office hours. The idea is that the build image and run image could have different UIDs but the same GID, so that the purpose of this would be for security, so the user can't edit any of these files unless they're group writable at runtime. This makes sense to me, and it actually already works, but the spec forbids it, even though we don't have any enforcement of it.
Is the correct way to enforce that though, like in the image as it was created? I mean, like we see this happen on other platforms specifically just by making the images read-only.
Yeah, I wonder if this is the wrong way to go about solving the problem, especially because build packs may make assumptions. Like if you're using 20 different build packs in your build, many of them may make assumptions about whether they can write. Using Unix permissions to, will definitely work as a means of preventing writes, but if it's really, the goal is to have a read-only image, it might be better to do that using platform features that make the file system read-only.
Should we add this as a topic if we want to talk about it?
Yeah, like I think it'd be better if Sam, I guess, did this. Yeah, was here, but I think we can fight it out a little bit without him.
Sounds good. I'll add it.
Time zone is hard for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can still leave feedback and then talk with them about it.
All right. So that's in the agenda. Next one, disambiguate layer metadata files from app metadata. Another one from Sam.
I can talk to this too because I just read through it. I think it came out of a conversation that we had in Slack. But right now we name files that contain layer metadata with the layer ID.toml. But we've added a couple other .toml files that the build pack needs for other purposes, launch toml and build toml. And every time we add one of those, if someone had a layer that was named launch or build, it conflicts now. And if we just namespaced everything with a layer dot, we wouldn't have this problem in the future and it'd be more explicit. Seems like a reasonable improvement to me.
It's interesting because isn't there a spec PR that attacks this from exactly the opposite direction and forbids those names completely?
That spec PR was also from Sam, and it's codifying what's already true. Like the lifecycle actually forbids you from creating layers with those names, but it was never in the spec. So I think that PR is about clarifying the world as it actually is. And we probably want to merge that change into the next API version so we can get it in as soon as possible, because it's an undocumented truth about how our lifecycle behaves, at least. But I think this is a better approach for versions of the spec after that.
I don't know if I'm sold on having a layers directory where, because we've put things that aren't layers in it, now we have to rename the layers to different things.
Yeah, I thought maybe a better solution would be to like reorganize the directories and stuff like that. But I feel like we run into problems like this a lot where this is better than what we have. The best thing is a major reorganization that I wouldn't want to require in order to merge this improvement, right?
Do we want to talk about this more? Is this in Jenna? Sorry, just trying to make sure we don't. We actually just get through all the RFC status checks.
Put it on the agenda. Do these need any? These have all the right things attached to them, right? Did somebody do that ahead of time?
I did it.
Awesome. It's much easier. RFC process specific working directory. Forest here, yeah.
Yeah, I made some updates to this from feedback from last working group meeting. Changed the key name, and I clarified the interaction that it would have with profile and executee scripts, as well as its assignment in terms of OCI, like OCI image metadata. I have some typos that I need to fix because I forgot to swap everything over. Yeah, just if people want to continue to check this out and have discourse on it, it's totally fine. I'll keep looking at this.
Sounds good. I still don't like your key name. I think working directory is too long. We should go to the Kate's working dir. Did you want to talk about this in the agenda, or just still looking for asynchronous feedback?
I'm just still looking for asynchronous feedback. I don't think it needs to be discussed again.
Awesome. Next thing on the list is guidelines for accepting component level contributions.
I think that's you, Stephen.
Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry. Just read it without thinking about it. Yes. So where are we at with this one?
I think the biggest thing from the last working group was an action item for you to investigate CNCF policies, or if there was prior art there in CNCF. I left a comment like a few minutes ago on that from Joe's thing. Other than that, I think it looks good to me, of just trying to make sure we're not doing anything we shouldn't be.
Sounds good. I'll follow up on the if there are any legal questions and stuff before pushing it forward. Next one is RFC for displaying contributor graph. Do we have Anthony? I don't see him. Anybody have context on this one? Is he still just looking for feedback?
Yeah,
Seems
a
like
lot of that
I-
seems from 2 days ago, so
can leave
that
it.
seems to be moving at the very least, if that's our requirement for this meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Issue generation. Javier's not here also. Let's see where we're at. It's got some comments 20 minutes ago. So it looks like
I think it
just
mostly
still-
just needs reviews from the core team probably.
cool. Project descriptor, domains RFC.
I've incorporated feedback. I don't know how to get people to, I guess, review it, but need some type of view from the rest of the folks in the core team.
Cool. This is still kind of same format you were talking about before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly just how we deal with the project stuff. That was kind of the big discussion, right?
Underscore. Like it.
But yeah, I listed basically in the kind of alternatives a bunch of the other suggestions that people have posted in the thread as well.
Cool. Looking for feedback still.
Yep.
Package refactoring.
Yeah. So this is an RFC that really only impacts the pack repo. So I thought it might be a good first step to just have those maintainers approve it.
Last comment was 12 days ago. Anything we need to do to get this pushed along?
I could poke them more, but
I know I
Hold on,
only had.
There's a
Go ahead.
Sherpa for this. Oh, there isn't one. How did this not have a Sherpa?
Did I hear you volunteering, Ben?
No, there is a random,
There's
there's a random
platform.
selector for this.
We should select a platform person.
Oh,
We should check the history. Maybe the person unassigned themselves.
that sounds a lot like it.
I don't see that.
Maybe not. Is it a draft?
No. Maybe it was a draft or something. So it didn't get assigned. I don't know. Should we assign it to Javier because he's not here?
It's running its random selection as we speak.
Oh, cool. All right, I'll leave that where it is and move on to builder, key, and project descriptor.
It was Javier. So Dan, like if you need to like whip votes for this, Javier is supposed to be helping you do that.
all right, thanks.
Cool. Looks like I'm the Sherpa on this one. It looks like it has enough approvals to move forward.
Yeah, it's already been through SAP. I think it's blocked on issues being created.
Closing on March. Yep, waiting for some issues to be created. Where are we with that?
Have to do it. We'll
Is
do
that right? I thought the Sherpa's responsible for issues. Is that not right?
Sherpa is responsible for telling people to create the issues, but not creating the actual issues. See,
Which
you
is why
see
the
a
whole process breaks down and we need the issue
fulfilled my-
creation RFC.
obligation here.
Frequently when I'm the Sherpa, I just go and make placeholder issues because it's easier than asking someone else to do it. But
As long as they get created somehow.
there's always the danger you're gonna miss one. You know, you forgot about Tecton or something.
This entered final comment period. Last one entered final comment period 21 days ago. Emily,
This
you're
is
the
my
assignee.
fault. Yeah.
Cool. All set to kind of move that one forward.
Yes.
Cool. And that concludes our RFC review. First thing on the agenda after that is 504s on export.
Yeah, I put this one up. So this I've been seeing quite a bit, and I think some other folks have as well. So I ran into this when I was doing a pack build of the KPack controller, and I was using the CF build service tiny builder. And consistently over the last couple days, I reach an unexpected status code 504 gateway timeout. And we're thinking that it's a Docker issue. I tried it with a couple other builders as well, no success. And I know that Anthony said they were experiencing some similar problems, and Yael maybe as well. Did you say that? I posted about it in the Buildpacks Pack CLI Slack. I don't know if that's the best place for this, but I was wondering if we, if anyone else was experiencing this, or if there's a way that we could maybe make, the life cycle a little bit more resilient to these errors, and if it's something that we wanted to look into. Just want people's thoughts on that.
I just have to say that I stopped experiencing this.
Oh, you did?
Yes, it was just for a few minutes that something was probably wrong with Docker or something else, but then it stopped. So
Okay.
I gave a demo sometime late last week and kept getting 504s when I had to switch to a smaller app because it was too big, and for my local kind cluster I couldn't export layers to it. So I've definitely seen those errors also. Does Go Container Registry do very much to retry uploads? Does it make sense?
There were specific errors in the lifecycle caused by layers that were too large producing 504s, and that issue was fixed in GGCR and pulled into the lifecycle and needs to be released, I believe. There could still be other reasons, but one major cause is already fixed.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Do you have a link to that? So you look at that.
Yep.
It seems like exactly what I ran into. I couldn't build Pet Clinic. I had to build Spring Music instead.
I know. Pet Clinic's such a good one.
I can link you to the lifecycle error in the agenda, which includes the link to the GDCR error.
That'd be great. That's awesome if this is already fixed.
Awesome. Anything else?
That should be it.
It's good you brought that up because it seems like an important thing for people to know about.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Next thing on the agenda is different user RFC. Let's talk about both of Sam's RFCs without him here. Anybody want to kick us off on this, or
We can circle back to where we were about read-only images, right? Well, I think that is good guidance, and it might be the best way to do it. I don't know why we have to have such a strong opinion that people couldn't use this other mechanism, right? If someone wants to set up a stack with different users, I don't see a huge problem in that.
Buildpacks themselves wouldn't have an awareness that such a thing was happening. They can't anticipate it, which means they're shamodding a lot to make sure that they will always have access.
Also,
you have to defensively change the permissions on every single file you've written to make sure that you still gain access.
But you make sure the group has access, right? But I don't think there's a lot of cases where you want the group has to have read access, but I don't think you want the user to have write access in many cases. And also, you could say that some of this is rolled up into the stack ID. Like a build pack says it supports a stack, and the default users are a feature of the stack.
So this wouldn't mean that for an existing stack, you can use a different ID on the run image, just that the stack is allowed to say that the run image runs as a different user. I wonder if this is too much stack proliferation. Like we said, okay, stacks are now like bionic. They're not like you know, Bob's custom stack, right? Ideally for stack IDs. You know, is there a way we could express, use the express contractual okayness with read-onlyness, right? Without having to, you know, have people, you know, create different versions of the stack. And separately, is this something we want the user to be able to control by selecting a stack image? Or is this more like, could this be a build pack feature that says when the exporter exports these layers, make them root owned instead of owned by the CNB user? Would that be a better interface?
I don't think it should be the build pack's responsibility, because I think definitely see cases where the people who want to do this are not build pack authors. They're sort of app developers who are running in a platform that has certain guidance, or they're stack authors, right?
I think maybe the direction I'm coming from is, why are all of the files the build packs generate writable by default anyways? Like, it seems like it's a little bit of, it's like kind of the way, you know, Cloud Foundry and Heroku used to work. It's not that uncommon, you know, on platforms for the files to be owned by the user that's running them. But, you know, like if you look at a Linux distribution deployed to a VM, right? Apache is running as, you know, a HTTPD user, but the files are all owned by root. So, you know, if you get access to that user, you can't modify it. Like, should that maybe be the default? And then build packs have to opt in to, you know, user writable directories if they want to. And then that way, it's not something all the
Would it
build
even
packs have to
be
agree to.
user writable, or would we just schmod all these out? And if you think you want to do this, you need group write in a way, like the way you opt in is you schmod something with group write instead, like a particular file, like you'd go to 664 instead of 644.
But then the group would have to be, if we kept the user the same in both cases, then the file would have to be owned by the group of the user.
Yeah, but we know what that is, right? Like when you go off and when you chown all the files to root, you could group them with the CNB group ID, right?
Yeah, because there's like, it's kind of inconsistent whether tools will write with the group write or not. I wonder if it's better to like ignore the permissions and just use just like if the flag were just, you know, is this layer writable by root, or is this layer writable by, you know, the normal user, and the default is root and export, right? Would that be enough kind of?
And the way that gets handled is by a chown during export.
It would just, when the exporter writes the layer to the registry, it would just write it with the root user. Yeah.
But what group would be assigned to that then? To those files as well, in addition to their
00 root as well. Yeah.
I don't know. So I think where it gets complicated is the place where this ends up being the most relevant is probably the apter rather than build pack created layers anyways. I don't know if the build pack always knows I guess a build pack could say like make the apter not writable if it really wanted to, right? But I'm not sure it feels like the right distribution of responsibilities to me. I sort of like the straightforwardness of a build pack author being able to, in their build pack, if they're inspecting the file permissions or something, those are the permissions that are going to be in the final image. And then they can check the user of the final image, sort of straightforward, a little bit less magic.
There's a security benefit to the two user model, which is, you know, kind of on that track, right? Which is that if you had like, you know, some SUID things that once they're owned by root become more dangerous, right? Having everything owned by a build time user that's separate from the runtime user might be the most secure, you know, configuration for it.
Maybe we can even put some guidance in the spec that like Buildpacks shouldn't expect the user to be the same. If something needs to be writable by the user, you know, make it so that it has group write permissions. We can also give some guidance that, you know, if you need to write a file or something in a execd or profile on startup, you should be using a temp or something that is expected to be writable by the runtime user, not the apter or layer.
So many of the use cases for execd could be writing into the apter though,
I wonder if
but maybe it doesn't matter.
But I think you could put it on the build pack. So the build pack is going to know whether it's attempting to write into the apter, right? So if it knows that it can't assume the user is the same, it should be within its power and its responsibility to fix that, right?
Yeah, and that's potentially it chmodding the application dir, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think you end up with a nice balance where we haven't, you know, if someone really wanted to make sure it was totally read-only, they could still run as read-only, and then some of these use cases wouldn't work. But the default is not that everything's writable, it's that certain things that the build pack explicitly made writable are writable.
I want to avoid the complexity of requiring build packs to do things like recursively change permissions on a large number of files that the build pack may not know what that's about, right? Like to me, it's safer to do this in a really coarse-grained way than or to like have the interface be coarse-grained and absolute, as opposed to kind of pushing the complexity of permissions management onto build pack author or, you know, app developer. Like the user seems the right level for this to me. I wonder if there's another proposal to allow build packs to select a run image or have multiple run images per builder, right? I wonder if there's like some contract in build pack toml where build packs can say, you know, this, yes, I'm compatible with this special, you know, different user run image, right? Does that proposal link into this proposal and become a way of having build packs contractually accept a run image with a different user?
Like what's Bionic? Like what's the contract for Bionic then at that point? Is Bionic matching users? Is that what the contract for that is? And then there's a Bionic plus symbol different user that's a completely different stack ID. Like I think it's really difficult if we want to enable this use case to tie it to an actual stack ID because the behaviors are different.
Could be a special mix-in, right?
Yeah. Like I actually want to push back on your desire for a coarse-grained thing. I think making very surgical changes is actually a preference here, security-wise. Like I think the default case today, right? Like if we split the user IDs, like nearly everything would work today, because we've already had to go off. Certainly, like on our side of the fence, we've had to go off and deal with the fact that there are read-only use cases for this. So we've actually already done the hard work. And if I do want to make an exception to it, making an exception in one very small directory or one very surgical file feels like a better outcome than saying, okay, flip the switch so that everything's writable again for me.
I think I'm okay with surgical, like saying, you know, these particular files are writable or not writable at the lifecycle level. It just, to me, using the user to control that as opposed to changing the group and hoping that all the files are, you know, have the right group permissions or you know, whatnot, seems like it's a little bit safer. So I'm not, if we decide to go with something that where you could say these groups of files are owned by this user and these groups of files are not, that seems better to me. It's more the, like, you know, using fine-grained, you know, Unix permissions on these. Like maybe there's a way to do it that's very clean and that'd be great, but I'm a little skeptical of it.
Hey, Terrence or Jesse, like how are you guys thinking about this from like security and personas inside of the containers as these things are running? You doing anything crazy like making the file system read only?
No, we're not doing anything like that yet. I wouldn't say we wouldn't be interested in that at some point though. Like, I think that makes sense to at least investigate. I was going to mention before I have to bounce here in a minute, make sure we're including Windows in this discussion. I don't know how hard or difficult it might be to do some of these situations we've talked about with Windows. So I think whatever we design, we want to make sure to loop in someone who's got a little bit more Windows permission stuff here.
Yeah, I will say we did do in the early days of Heroku, even pre-Buildpacks, we did do this read-only thing. And as a PAS, I know we ran into a bunch of problems of just most people are fine, but there's definitely like the 5 to 10% of people who ran into problems of just us always assuming to mount read-only. But like I think I said last week in the office hours when Sam brought this up, like I think for Sam's use case, it's not a general PAS, it's a very specific like internal thing that you're building. Like you get to kind of make those calls, right? Like this is just how this platform's going to function. So when we came around and did Buildpacks, I think we explicitly by design did not force the kind of built, I guess, working directory to not be read-only.
The worst smell to me here is that a build pack like the node build pack can write the node runtime into a layer that's outside of the app directory. And then at runtime, the user that's running node can also modify the node binary, right? That, to me, that's the worst part of the security story that we have, and that making it so that by default, in the normal case, when the node build pack installs the node runtime, it's running as a normal user, but at launch, that user can't go back and modify the runtime afterwards. Seems like it'd be a really big win. And the rest of the interface around that, I don't have extremely strong opinions about.
Because we're short, like basically a feature that Dockerfile already has today, right? And that is to change users that you exist during the build and then that you exist in during the run to attempt to deal with this exact same thing. Like, ignore whether or not you'd ever use it to make something read-only. We literally just don't have the ability to have two different users.
What I like about the two-user solution, or what I think is elegant about it, is that we're not forcing build pack authors or app developers who are debugging issues to have to learn about our specific feature that represents this. Like it's all just using things that they are already familiar with. That's what I think is nice about it. And I don't know why we explicitly forbid this in the spec. Like if I go and take a Bionic Paketo run image and change the user, like everything already works right now. It's only the spec that says you're not allowed to do that, but it's totally fine.
Every build pack author wrote their build pack with the expectation that their files would be writable based on that thing in the spec. So changing the spec is not, or like, it does have a downside, right?
Yeah, but it's actually loosening the spec, right? Like this doesn't, so making that change doesn't hurt particularly.
No, but it hurts build pack authors, right? Because build pack authors read that they can make an assumption, a strict assumption, right? And if we relax that assumption and say, okay, users are actually allowed to change, like the developers are allowed to change the user at runtime to something where they could no longer write, then build pack authors made a decision about that they'd be able to write to locations. Now their build packs will fail at launch in those cases.
Yeah, like I hate those build pack authors. Like I think the reason that like the Paketo build packs do not observe this to be a significant problem, and the fact that it will just work is like we're super careful about not writing any files into an ephemeral container in the first place. Like there's just no write anymore in these things.
Except for you're saying XXD.
There's a couple weird
existed,
cases, like our CA cert, we generate a bunch of links with names, but we do it in a temp dir and point the environment variable at the dir we've created.
And even that is hyper protected for those environments where this runs in a completely read-only environment. Like, no matter what change we make here, every single build pack that writes a file should already be accounting for the fact that they might be running on that other platform that really strongly encourages you to go with read-only file systems, just for safety.
Should the build pack that contributes the process type have any say over what user that process type runs as? We haven't talked about, like, we're talking about things at the stack level or at the build packs
I don't
describing
think
files level.
so, because different platforms have approached this different ways. Like a lot of OpenShift users have the security set up so that when you run a pod, it runs as a random user in the root group, which is a sort of different use case as well, right? And we've enabled a feature in Packless. You run the build in the root group so that you actually create a runnable image. And that whole workflow is actually kind of similar to this, where the only thing you're guaranteeing is that the group is the same. But platforms can be changing users. And I think if we built in an expectation in our spec that we had to run a specific users, we're going to end up being incompatible with some platforms that we could be compatible with.
I agree strongly that we should solve the problem. I would much rather, use this to drive out fixing the glaring security problems that already exist, right? Than tacking on another, something else on top.
Yeah, I think I'm okay putting a pin in this since Sam didn't participate anyway. We don't even have like what his preference would be on this, but I think there's a good enough discussion for us to move on to the next one.
I guess what are we putting on that PR? We had this discussion, but he did not hear it and or may not necessarily watch the recording.
Everybody go back and make your arguments in the PR and your comments.
Cool. So I could also mention, hey, this was discussed at the working group meeting for a good 20 minutes. Might want to take a look. Might be good too.
A really kind person would link to the minute this discussion started.
Oh, volunteering there, huh?
No one's ever described Emily as kind.
All right, moving on to the next one, also from Sam, layer rename RFC.
This one I'm with you, or like in an ideal world, we wouldn't have named the actor workspace, it'd be named app. And the layers dir would be named workspace, and each build pack would have a workspace. Maybe under that they'd have some layers, because there's a bunch of stuff in layers that aren't layers. And this is a hack to solve that. And maybe there's a better solution, but if nobody's going to contribute a better solution, I'll take the incremental improvement.
There's no reason, thinking about the lifecycle implementation, there's no reason why we have those files as persistent files that survive each execution of the build pack. And in fact, we have other files like the bill of materials files, right, that are ephemeral and go away after each build pack executes and they're processed by the lifecycle. Like, it's just kind of weird that we have launch toml and build toml where they are at all in some ways. When other similar files like build materials files, right, inputs and outputs, come in as
build
arguments.
Materials are in launch and build toml now. But
oh, that's right.
I
That's
get what
right.
you
We
mean about
did
the
move
build
them.
plan.
Yeah.
Build plan isn't writable anymore. We don't have any existing writable ephemeral files.
I think my point is more, can we move these files somewhere else so the layers directory keeps its purpose of being a layers directory where layer folders are layer names and folder name.toml is layer metadata.
Is this restructuring kind of stuff one of those like would be nice for 1.0 things that we keep talking about?
I think so.
Is there a label? Should we have a label for RCs that are just like, we want stuff for 1.0?
The one we just talked about also, I feel like it's kind of a 1.0 discussion, security of that.
I don't mind the ephemeral files. I think there's still a couple things that for practical reasons we end up wanting to put in the layer stir, not the Buildpacks layer stir. We put some config files in the platform layer stir because it happens to be a volume by necessity, and we need to pass things between lifecycle phases on a volume. Instead of making users mount yet another volume for no good reason, we like to use the volume that already exists. So I think even if we got some of this stuff out of layers, there are always going to be a couple things in layers that aren't layers.
Could we move build then launch.toml to the platform dir? Then break the read-only requirement there.
Well, I like the ephemeral files better than platform dir, I think.
Platform dir already has some ephemeralness, right, with the environment variables coming from. I guess they're not exactly ephemeral. Platform sets those up. Could we make a new directory inside of the layer stir called metadata or something, and then just have one layer name that's permanently you're not allowed to use metadata and metadata.toml?
Oh, we have a metadata.toml under layers.
Can we move? Do we have a metadata directory? No.
It's called config, but it's like the same thing.
That's not under layers though. That's under /layers, not the buildpack layer directory.
It's under the platforms layers directory.
Yeah. Can we? If we can't find a good place to put all the launch toml and build toml and all that, could we just have one reserved layer name inside of layers? Would that be at least a little bit cleaner? And then we wouldn't have to do the ephemeral file thing.
I've lost you somewhere. Like, what's the point of the one reserved layer name?
Sorry. Instead of moving build toml and launch toml into the platform dir, or coming up with another location to write those files that's maybe fixed for every build pack and is parsed in between the two, could we keep everything we have as it is today, but instead of renaming the layer metadata files to layer dot something dot toml, just have one reserved layer name, like metadata? There'd be a folder inside of layers that would then have toml files in it, like launch toml and build toml.
Yeah, it solves the problem where there's one thing you can't name your layers, which is weird. And I think what we're trying to get away from here, right?
Well, it's better than 3 things, or it's better than an infinite number of expanding things as we add them to the project.
Yeah, the other thing you do is move all the layers down a level, and then there's nothing that you can't name it, right? Layers/layers.
We'd have layers /buildpack ID /layers/layer name.
Yeah, we could call the directory we gave to the build pack, instead of calling it the Buildpacks layers directory, call it the Buildpack workspace. And it can write things to the top level of the workspace, or it can add layers into the layers directory that it should find in its workspace.
I'm trying to think of, like, is there a way we could do this iteratively so that there's not as much code change for build packs? And if we add launch, the reason that just shoving everything in a subdir is, I think, at least something to consider to me, is this way we can reserve the other names that we have right now and keep supporting them, but also support the subdirectory, and then eventually deprecate the things on the outside. And that way it's like there's almost no breaking change. We reduce the namespace we're clobbering to exactly one file, and then over time everything kind of works out. But I know it doesn't really solve the problem. It just makes it a little cleaner.
Okay with any of these solutions.
Yeah, I don't have a very strong opinion. I don't like layer dot something dot toml though. I think we should have a layers directory that behaves in the way that people expect. Does anybody else have thoughts? Maybe Sam can go back and listen to the different options here and see what he likes best.
One big drawback about the rename is that the day you do it, you can't reuse layers anymore.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you don't make the directories have the name, then you can reuse your layers. Okay, I take it back. This is the advantage to the approach. If we're only renaming the metadata file, we don't have to change the paths of the directory, so we don't have to throw away old layers.
Yeah. So it's just a question of ephemeral files somewhere else, or shove it all into a directory and just reserve one word and then move on with our lives.
Do you want to summarize that, Emily, in text?
Yeah, we could do that.
I just think it's mean to ask someone to listen to like 40 minutes of people talking.
I already feel bad for making the people in this meeting listen to it.
All right. Are we at time here? Or we're not at time, but anything else to chat about this week? Thanks, everybody.